الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So we continue بإذن الله تعالى with our reading through the explanation of this tremendous work by Shaykh al-Islam al-Mujaddid, the Imam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala, شروط الصلاة وأركانها وواجباتها, the pillars, or the conditions of the prayer, its pillars and its obligations. And we discussed previously some of the masail, some of the issues concerning satr al-awrah, the covering of the awrah. And now we move on to the final and the last remaining conditions of the salah, beginning with the seventh condition. So he said rahimahullah ta'ala, الشرط السابع, the seventh condition, دخول الوقت, دخول الوقت, the entering of the time. That the prayer time has to have entered. والدليل من السنة حديث جبريل عليه السلام وحديث جبريل عليه السلام أنه أما النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في أول الوقت وفي آخره فقال يا محمد الصلاة بين هذين الوقتين. And the evidence for this from the Sunnah is the hadith of Jibreel عليه السلام, that he led the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم in prayer at the earliest time of the prayer and at the latest time of the prayer, and he said to him, O Muhammad, الصلاة بين هذين الوقتين, that the prayer is between these two times. وقوله تعالى إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا, and the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the prayer is enjoined upon the believers كتابا موقوتا, يعني at fixed hours, at fixed times. أي مفروضا في الأوقات, meaning that is made an obligation at specific timings. ودليل الأوقات قوله تعالى, and the evidence for these fixed times is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أقم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا. Establish the prayer from midday to the darkness of the night and recite the Quran at Fajr, at dawn. Indeed, the recitation of the Quran at Fajr is ever witnessed. طيب. And Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad حفظه ta'ala, that he goes on to explain يشترط لصحة الصلاة أداء الصلوات الخمس في أوقاتها. There's a condition for the validity of the prayer, that those five daily prayers, that they are performed and established in their fixed times. فلا يجوز أن تصلى قبل أوقاتها, so it's not permissible that they are prayed before the times. وإن صليت وجب إعادتها, and if they are prayed before its time, before the correct time, then it is an obligation to repeat them. ولا يجوز تأخيرها عن وقتها, and it is not permissible to delay the prayer outside of its time. فلو أخرها حتى خرج وقتها فإن كان لنوم لا تفريط معه أو نسيان قضاها ولا إثم عليه. And if he was to delay them to outside of their fixed times, then if that was due to him being asleep, for example, with a sleep that has no تفريط معه, that has no excessiveness with it, he wasn't excessively sleeping, أو نسيان, or due to forgetfulness, he forgot to pray them, قضاها, then he makes up for them وَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ, and there is no sin upon him. وَإِنْ كَانَ لِغَيْرِ ذَلِكَ أَثِمَ وَقَضَاهَا. And if it was not for, or if it was for other than that, meaning for other than him sleeping or him forgetting to pray it, then he is sinful. Then he is sinful and he is to make up for it. طيب, then he says, حفظه الله تعالى, وحديث إمامة جبريل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في يومين جاء عن جماعة من الصحابة منهم ابن عباس وجابر وهو عند أبي داود والترمذي وانظر التعليق على حديث وحديث من مسند الإمام أحمد. And he says, as for the hadith of when Jibreel alayhi salam, that he led the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam in salah over a period of 2 days, then this hadith has come to us from a jama'ah, from the companions, a group of the companions. From them is Ibn Abbas and Jabir, and it is collected by Abu Dawood and At-Tirmidhi. طيب. Then he said, ومن أوضح ما جاء في بيان أوقات الصلوات الخمس حديث عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما في صحيح مسلم. And from the clearest of that which has come, clarifying the awqat, clarifying the fixed time periods for the 5 daily prayers, is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, collected in Sahih Muslim. أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, that the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم said, وقت الظهر إذا زالت الشمس وكان ظل الرجل كطوله. That he said صلى الله عليه وسلم, that the time for dhuhr is when the sun passes the meridian, and the shadow of a man is the same as his length. The shadow of a man is the same as his length. ما لم تحضر العصر, as long as Asr, or up until, or as long as Asr has not entered. As long as Asr has not entered. Then he said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَوَقْتُ الْعَصْرِ مَا لَمْ تُصْفَرَّ الشَّمْسِ. And the time for Asr is as long as the sun has not become yellow, meaning when it reaches the horizon and begins to set. وَوَقْتُ صَلَاةِ الْمَغْرِبِ مَا لَمْ يَغِبِ الشَّفَقُ. And the time for the Maghrib prayer is as long as the twilight has not disappeared. As long as the twilight has not disappeared. وَوَقْتُ صَلَاةِ الْعِشَاءِ إِلَى نِصْفِ اللَّيْلِ الْأَوْسَطِ. And the time for the prayer of Isha is up until midnight, is up until the middle of the night. ووقت صلاة الصبح من طلوع الفجر ما لم تطلع الشمس فإذا طلعت الشمس فأمسك عن الصلاة فإنها تطلع بين قرن الشيطان. And the dawn prayer is from the rising of Fajr, or from the entering of Fajr, as long as the sun has not risen. And if the sun rises, then refrain from praying, for indeed it rises between the two horns of the shaitan. طيب, and this hadith, that it is an umdah in relation to this. And it's one of the main ahadith in relation to the awqat of the salawat. One of the main ahadith that pertains to the timings, the fixed timings of the prayer, where he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he clarified every individual prayer and its time. طيب. So as for وقت الصلاة الفجر, so in relation to the time for Salat al-Fajr, then there's an important point to make, and that is that it is the Fajr that is known as Fajr al-Sadiq, yani the true dawn, is known as true dawn, and it is not the Fajr that is known and defined as al-Fajr al-Kathib, the fake dawn. The fake dawn. And there are differences that the ulama have derived and mentioned between the two. And this is an important point here, that there are main differences and ways to determine and distinguish between when is the Fajr al-Kadhib and when is the Fajr al-Sadiq. That when is it the fake dawn, that which is known as the fake dawn, and when is it true dawn. And Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala, that he mentions three main differences in his sharh of Bulugh al-Maram, that he mentions rahimahullah ta'ala three major differences between the two. So, and we will briefly just list them. That he mentions rahimahullah ta'ala, the first difference between them is that the fake Fajr, the false Fajr, the false dawn, that it is mumtad la mu'tarad, or mumtad طولا, meaning that it stretches out vertically. The false Fajr, that it stretches out vertically. And as for the true Fajr, the true dawn, then it stretches out horizontally. That is the first difference that he mentions. The second difference between the two, and again we were mentioning them على سبيل اختصار, we mentioned them just briefly, that he mentions rahimahullah ta'ala that the false Fajr, that it rises and it becomes dark. That it becomes dark. So it's bright for a period of time and then it becomes dark again. And as for the true Fajr, then it does not become dark. بل يزداد نورا, but rather it just increases in light. It becomes more light as time passes. The third difference that he mentions rahimahullah ta'ala is that the true Fajr, that it connects to the horizon. متصل بالأفق, that it connects to the horizon. وليس بينه وبين الأفق ظلمة, and that there is no gap or darkness between it and the horizon. But the true Fajr, the true dawn, that it connects all the way to the horizon. That we do not see a gap of darkness between it and the horizon. And likewise, the reason for knowing these differences and the importance of distinguishing between the two, that why do we mention this, is because the ahkam al-shar'iyyah, the Islamic rulings and legislations in relation to the Fajr prayer, in relation to fasting and other than that, that they are muta'alliqah bil Fajr al-Sadiq, that they are connected to the true dawn. That they are connected to the true dawn, and they are not connected to the false dawn. So it's not possible for a person to pray Salat al-Fajr when the false dawn has entered, but rather he is to pray Salat al-Fajr when the true dawn has entered. Going by those main distinguishing factors that we mentioned. And likewise, there is the difference that was mentioned in the hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he mentioned al-Fajr Fajran, that the Fajr is two types. The Fajr is of two types. So this hadith, and inshallah ta'ala refer back to the hadith that mentions that the Fajr is of two types, and one in which that it is permissible to eat that is impermissible to eat within it. And this is referring to, no doubt, the true Fajr, إلى آخر ما قاله صلى الله عليه وسلم, to the end of the hadith in which he said صلى الله عليه وسلم. طيب. So that is in relation to Salat al-Fajr. That's in relation to Salat al-Fajr. As for Salat al-Dhuhr, then we have mentioned, or that which is mentioned in the hadith, is that وقت الظهر إذا زالت الشمس. That the time of Dhuhr is if the sun passes the horizon. وكان ظل الرجل كطوله. And that the length of a man is, the shadow of a man is the same in terms of its length as his own length. So the length of the shadow is the same as the length of the object itself. طيب. ما لم تحضر العصر, as long as Asr has not entered. ووقت العصر ما لم تصفر الشمس. And the time for Asr is as long as the sun is not yellow, has not become more in terms of its color, in terms of its yellow. Meaning when it reaches the horizon and it begins to set. And some of the ulama, that they mention two different times when it comes to Salat al-Asr. Some of the ulama, that they mention two different time periods when it comes to praying Salat al-Asr. They mention that we have the waqt al-ikhtiyar, what they refer to as the waqt al-ikhtiyar, or the preferred time of praying Asr, and we have the waqt al-durura, or waqt al-dururi, the time in which it is a durura, which it is a necessity to pray in. This is not the time a person must pray in. طيب. As for the preferred time, the first one, waqt al-ikhtiyar, the preferred time, then this is the asl. This is the origin. The person prays within this time unless he is unable to. If he is unable to, then he prays in the waqt al-durura, the time where it is a durura, it's a necessity. So waqt al-ikhtiyar, this preferred time that the ulama mention, ينتهي حين يكون ظل الشيء مثليه. That it ends when the shadow of an object is now twice its length. So it ends when the shadow of an object is now twice its length. That this is what is known as the waqt al-ikhtiyar, the preferred time. And the waqt al-durura من ظل الشيء مثليه إلى غروب الشمس. That is from the time in which the shadow of an object is now twice its length up until the sun sets. That this is what is referred to as the waqt al-durura, or waqt al-dururi. And this is due to the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, من أدرك ركعة من العصر قبل أن تغرب الشمس فقد أدرك الصلاة. He said ﷺ, that whoever catches a rak'ah from the Asr prayer before the sun has set, then he has caught the salah. So some of the ulama make this distinction and mention these two different time periods for Salatul Asr. Then we have Salatul Maghrib, ووقت المغرب ما لم يغب الشفق. And the time period of Maghrib, Salat al-Maghrib, is as long as the twilight has not disappeared. As long as the twilight has not disappeared. وَوَقْتُ الصَّلَاةِ الْعِشَاء, and the waqt in the time for Salat al-Isha, إِلَى نِصْفِ اللَّيْلِ الْأَوْسَطِ, is up until the middle of the night. It is up until the middle of the night. And the middle of the night here does not mean 12 o'clock at night, but rather the middle of the night is calculated by taking the time of Maghrib. Taking the time of Maghrib, yani the time period between Maghrib and between Fajr. The time period between Maghrib and between Fajr, and dividing that time in half. So you take the time, the however many hours are between Maghrib and Salat al-Fajr, and you divide that in half, and then you add that half to Salat al-Maghrib, and you have the time for when Salat al-Isha ends. So Salat al-Isha, that it is up until the middle of the night. And وقيل ثلث الليل, and some have said that is up until the third, 1/3 of the night. وقيل غير ذلك, and other opinions have been mentioned likewise, but that which the adillah and the evidence alludes to, such as this hadith, is that the correct time is up until the middle of the night. Up until the middle of the night. طيب. Now we move on بإذن الله تعالى to the 8th condition. So he said رحمه الله الشرط الثامن, the 8th condition, استقبال القبلة, facing the Qiblah. Facing the Qiblah. وَالدَّلِيلُ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى, and the evidence for this is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَحَيْثُمَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَهُ. Where he said subhanahu wa ta'ala, indeed, we have seen the turning of your face towards the heavens. So we shall turn you to a Qiblah that shall please you. So turn your face to the direction of Masjid al-Haram. Turn your face towards the direction of Masjid al-Haram. طيب. So Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Abbad حفظه الله تعالى, he explains and he says, يشترط في أداء الصلوات أن تكون إلى جهة القبلة وهي الكعبة المشرفة. There is a condition for performing the prayer, for performing the salawat, that a person is facing the Qiblah. A person is facing the Qiblah. And the Qiblah meaning Al-Ka'bah Al-Musharrafah, the Ka'bah. So in relation to someone who is ba'id, someone who is far away, then he faces Jihatul Qiblah. He faces the direction of the Qiblah. As for the one who is qareeb, as for the one who is nearby and close, that he is praying inside of Masjid al-Haram, he is praying in front of the Kaaba, then upon him is to face Aynul Kaaba, the Kaaba itself. That he faces the Kaaba itself. And the one who is praying and he is ba'id, yani he is far away, then he faces the jihah. He faces the direction of the Qiblah. طيب. Then he said حفظ الله فإن كان في حضر أو كان لديه من يخبره بجهة القبلة وجب عليه السؤال عن جهتها. So he says that if he is a resident or he has someone who can inform him of the direction of the Qiblah, then it's a must, it's an obligation that he asks about its jihah, he asks about its direction. Again, if he is a resident, or he is able to get someone to inform him and ask them about the direction of the Qiblah, then it's an obligation upon him to ask. وَلَا يَجُوزُ لَهُ أَن يُصَلِّيَ بِاجْتِهَادٍ مِّنْهُ. It is not permissible for him to pray due to his own independent striving and reasoning, meaning himself trying to work out the direction of the Qiblah. وَلَدَيْهِ مَنْ يُخْبِرُهُ, whilst he has someone who can inform him of where it is. فَإِنْ صَلَّى وَكَانَ إِلَى غَيْرِ جِهَةِ الْقِبْلَةِ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْإِعَادَةِ. And if he prays and he has prayed to other than the direction of the Qiblah, then obligatory upon him is al-i'adah, is to repeat that prayer. Because he has prayed that salah using his own reasoning, without asking, whilst he is capable and he has the ability to ask someone who knows and may know of the direction of the Qiblah. Then he said, حفظ الله تعالى, أما إن كان في سفر فإنه يجتهد في معرفة جهتها. As for if he is traveling on a journey, then he is to perform ijtihad, and he is to strive and use his own reasoning in order to find out the direction of the jihah, and he does his best in relation to it. فإن صلى وتبين أن الصلاة إلى غير جهة القبلة فإن صلاته صحيحة لقوله تعالى فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم. And if he prays and it becomes apparent to him that he has prayed in other than the direction of the Qiblah, then his salah is sahihah, his salah is valid. And that is due to the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah Azza wa Jal with that which you are able to. So to summarize here, that he's mentioned, حفظه ta'ala, that the musalli بين حالين, that the one who is praying, that he is between two affairs. The first affair, أن يجتهد في البحث عن جهة القبلة, that he strives to find the direction of the Qiblah, to find and locate the correct direction of the Qiblah. وهو في حال يجوز له الاجتهاد, and he is in a state where he is allowed to make this ijtihad, that he is allowed to make this independent striving reasoning to find the Qiblah. As we mentioned, for example, he is upon a journey, that there is no one that he can ask in order to show him which direction the Qiblah is. So he does his uppermost to find the direction of the Qiblah. فَإِنْ أَصَابَ فَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ. And if he is correct, that he's prayed his salah, and he finds out that he was correct, and that he actually, in fact, indeed did pray towards the Qiblah, then alhamdulillah. وَإِنْ أَخْطَأَ فَصَلَاتَهُ صَحِيحًا. And if he is mistaken and he finds out that he had prayed to other than the direction of the Qiblah, then his salah is still sahihah, that his salah is valid. It is still valid. Why? Because he is ahl for ijtihad, that he is one who is deserving of making that ijtihad. As we mentioned, for example, the one who is traveling, and he has no one that can inform him of the direction of the Qiblah, then he does his uppermost to find the direction, and if he prays and he finds out that he has prayed to other than the direction of the Qiblah, then his salah is still valid. His salah is valid. The second category, the second affair in which he mentions, حفظ الله ta'ala, that a person لا يجتهد ولا يبذل الأسباب, that a person doesn't make ijtihad, he doesn't attempt to find the Qiblah, or he attempts to find the Qiblah but he has someone who can inform him of where it is. He is capable of asking, finding out exactly where it is. So this individual who either he doesn't make ijtihad, for example, he is traveling and he doesn't try his best to find out the direction of the Qiblah or locate it using his own logic and independent reasoning, or he is someone who has those around him that he can ask for the exact direction of the Qiblah, yet he chooses not to. So this individual, that if it becomes clear to him after performing the salah that he has prayed to other than the Qiblah, then his salah is غير صحيحة. His salah is invalid. His salah is invalid. وعليه إعادة الصلاة, and upon him is to repeat the prayer. And this is an important distinction to make. A very important distinction to make. Because it relies upon whether a person's prayer is sahihah or not. Whether his prayer is valid or not. And a person may be in a similar scenario. For example, let's say that a man, that he went to a hotel. He was staying in one room. And a second man is in the same hotel, staying in another room. The first man, they both need to pray. They both need to pray. So the first man, what does he do? He calls the receptionist and those who work in the hotel, and he asks them for the direction of the Qiblah. The second man, that he doesn't do so. He doesn't do so, but rather he decides to pray in any direction. Or he thinks, this is, I'll pray, inshallah, I'll pray towards this direction, and hopefully it's correct. The difference between the two is that the first one, his salah is sahihah. Why? Because he has those around him who can inform him of the direction of the Qiblah. So he goes and he inquires from them. The second one, he could have done that. He could have inquired. It was upon him to search and to ask and to inquire. But he chose not to do so. So therefore his salah, if he has prayed to other than the Qiblah, then his salah is invalid. That's an important distinction to make. Moving on بإذن الله تعالى. They says حفظه الله ويجوز للمسافر أن يصلي النوافل كلها على مركوبه إلى غير جهة القبلة. And it is permissible for the traveller that he prays all of his nawafil, all of his voluntary prayers upon his mode of transport, in his mode of transport, to other than the direction of the Qiblah. So the one who is a traveller and he is praying voluntary prayers, that is allowed for him to pray towards any direction if he is upon his mode of transport. وقد ثبتت السنة في ذلك عن جماعة من الصحابة. And it's been firmly established in the Sunnah that this has occurred, or that this happened from a number, or from a group of companions. منها حديث عامر بن ربيعة رضي الله عنه. From them is the hadith of Amir bin Rabi'ah رضي الله عنه قال رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو على الراحلة يسبح يومأ برأسه قبل أي وجه توجه ولم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يصنع ذلك في الصلاة المكتوبة. رواه البخاري ومسلم. And that is that he said رضي الله عنه, that I saw the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم whilst he was upon his riding beast, and he was making tasbih, saying Subhanallah, يومأ برأسه, and he was lowering his head قبل أي وجه توجهه, towards any direction in which he would face, meaning he was praying upon his riding beast. Then he said radiallahu anhu that the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would not do this for the Salat al-Maktubah, for the obligatory prayer. And that is collected by Bukhari and Muslim. طيب, وإذا أراد المسافر النافلة على الدابة استقبل القبلة عند دخوله فيها ثم توجه إلى أي جهة يريد. So if the traveler that he intends to pray a voluntary prayer upon his riding beast or upon his mode of transport, then he faces the Qiblah when he first begins his prayer. That he faces the Qiblah to begin his prayer, and then he carries on praying in any direction in which he turns and faces. لحديث أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه عند أبي داود, due to the hadith of Anas ibn Malik as collected by Abu Dawood, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا سافر فأراد أن يتطوع استقبل بناقته القبلة فكبر ثم صلى حيث وجهه ركابه. That the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, that if he would, or when he would travel, and that he intended to pray a voluntary prayer, that he would face towards the Qiblah with his riding, with his camel. Then he would make the opening takbir, and then he would pray in whichever direction that his mode of transport, his riding beast, takes him. قال الحافظ ابن حجر في البلوغ, and Hafid ibn Hajar رحمه الله تعالى said in البلوغ وإسناده حسن, his isnad is حسن. وقال شيخنا الشيخ عبد العزيز بن باز رحمه الله في حاشيته عليه, and Ibn Baz رحمه الله تعالى said هو كما قال المؤلف, that is as the mu'allif has said, رجاله ثقات لا بأس بهم, that its men, يعني the men of the chain of narration are ثقات, they all trustworthy and there is no issue with them. وبذلك يكون في هذا الحديث مخصصا للأحاديث الأخرى المطلقة في استقباله صلى الله عليه وسلم جهة سيره في السفر. And with this hadith, that it restricts, or it makes specific those general hadith that mention that the Prophet ﷺ would face the Qiblah in his journey whilst traveling. طيب, and quickly now بإذن الله تعالى that we will briefly take the last condition, as there is not much time remaining with us for the brothers بإذن الله تعالى, they wish to perform the Salat al-Isha, and they are beginning soon بإذن الله تعالى. So we will conclude with the last, or a brief explanation of the last condition, and that is where he said رحمه الله الشرط التاسع, the ninth condition, النية, the niyyah, the intention, ومحلها القلب, and its place is the heart, والتلفظ بها بدعة, and vocalizing it is a bid'ah. Vocalizing the intention, and saying it out loud, is a bid'ah, is an innovation. والدليل حديث, and the evidence is the hadith إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى, that indeed actions are but by intentions, and for every person is that which he intended. طيب. And as we mentioned before, that this shart, this condition of the niyyah, that it is a shart, it is a condition that is mukhtalafun fih, that is differed in relation to between the ulama. As we mentioned previously, that some of the scholars, that they have mentioned that the niyyah is not a shart, is not a condition, but rather they have included it as a rukun, as a pillar from the pillars of the salah, and not as a shart from the shurut of the salah. not as a condition from the conditions of the prayer. And the reason for this differing, as we mentioned as well, that it goes back to is ta'rif, it goes back to the definition of a shart. So they have said that the shart is kharijul amal, that it takes place outside of the action. But as for the niyyah, then it not only takes place outside of the amal, لكن يستمر مع العمل, as we mentioned as well, but rather it persists along with the action, meaning that niyyah, that intention, that it has to be present throughout the entire action itself. And hence why some of the scholars have differed and placed it as a pillar instead of a shart. Like in here, Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah ta'ala, that he's mentioned it as a condition, as a shart. طيب. And briefly, just to go through the last explanation of Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Abad Hafidhahullah ta'ala, that he says, النية في الصلاة وغيرها من العبادات شرط, that the intention in the prayer and in other than it from all of the acts of worship, that it is a condition. فلا تصح الصلاة بدون نية, so the prayer is not correct except with an intention, or the prayer is not correct without an intention. لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, due to his statement صلى الله عليه وسلم, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, that indeed actions are but by intentions. أخرجه البخاري ومسلم. وبالنية يكون التمييز بين فرض وفرض, and the intention that it distinguishes between one obligation and another. وفرض ونفل, and between an obligation and that which is a voluntary act. وقد تقدم عند ذكر شرط النية من شروط الوضوء أنه لا يجوز تلفظ الإنسان بما نواه. And as it has already been mentioned when we mentioned the condition of the niyyah from the conditions of the wudu, that it is not permissible that the intention be vocalized, that a person vocalizes and reads aloud that which he intends, إلا في مناسك الحج, except for the rituals of Hajj. فيجوز أن يتلفظ بما نواه, so it's permissible for him to say that which he intends. فيقول لبيك عمرة أو لبيك حجا أو لبيك عمرة وحجا. So he says لبيك عمرة, or he says لبيك حج, or he says لبيك عمرة وحج. يعني he vocalizes that which he is intending to do. طيب. And we will conclude with that بإذن الله تعالى. And inshallah ta'ala, next lesson, that we will go into the arkan and the pillars of the salah بإذن الله تعالى. ونكتفي بهذا وصلي اللهم وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.